So we want to touch on that a little bit more, and then get into the second half with the second beast. Any questions on any of that? I know we missed a week, and so it seems like it's been forever since we've been in here, but for me. Any questions on we had the dragon first. These are the visions, these 7 visions. The first one, you've got the woman clothed with the sun, then the beast from the sea. Questions before we get in? I don't remember exactly if we had talked much about but maybe just to review. I'm going to start reading at verse 5 in chapter 13. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. You see how it's attacking God and his name and his dwelling, but then it says this dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. That his people are his dwelling. He dwells among them, in them, and they in him. And so there's this unity between Christ and his church. You can't really separate. You can't attack Christ without attacking his church. You can't attack his church without attacking Christ himself. And Jesus says that too, right? He says, whatever they do, they do not reject you, but reject him who sent. He talks about, what is the verse? Where he considers an attack on his own as if it was to him. Yeah, those are so interconnected. It was in the saints and to conquer them, and you see there's a victory. It looks like the dragon or the beast wins. Paul?
Is there any significance with the 42 months and 3.5 years?
So that's used a number of times in this, and it's always kind of this whole, what we've said, the New Testament period. The 3.5, the 42 months, that it's the New Testament. It seems like that's what it's talking about. So now, but then putting it in that frame, it says it's a limited amount of time. It won't last forever. He has this window that he can do this in, which is now until the end, and he won't at some point. But that's kind of the idea. And it seems to be the same. We would assume that every time that there's 42 months or 3.5 years. 1,260 days, it sometimes describes it. Either way, it's the same time period, and we would say it's symbolic of the New Testament period. Because and we found that from the time, was it in chapter 11, where he's told to measure the temple, and he says, not the court of the Gentiles, and not the city, because that's trampled for 42 months. So it's this time in which the visible church has believers and unbelievers. And there's false teaching and there's true teaching going on at the same time in the visible church. And Jesus tells that parable too, where they have the green field and there's weeds in it. They say, should we pull them up? He says, no, because you might pull up the wheat with it. So leave it until the harvest. And so they're side by side, believers and unbelievers in the visible church, side by side until the end. And in this time, there's this back and forth. Okay? And authority was given over it over every tribe and people and language and nation and all who dwell on earth and will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life. The people who worship it are those who are not his chosen one. His believers aren't going to worship this beast. Because their name has been written from the foundation of the world. That's a reference to election, where God's eternal selection of his own, and these are saved. These are his. And they're not going to, they're not under his authority. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. You see that's in verse. And I don't know if it's a direct quote from Jeremiah chapter 15. And it has the idea of, that this is foretold. This is not that some are taken captive by this, or that there's these attacks. It has been foretold. It has been prophesied. It is maybe related to the idea. The crosses that we face in life, the trials through which Jesus says, through much tribulation enter the kingdom of heaven. Those things are not outside of God's plan and control. Even in election, so the formula of Concord, one of our Lutheran confessions, is a beautiful line. And it's talking about those things that God has, we talked about election, how he has selected his own from the foundation of the world, from eternity. It says part of that, it says, includes in that the sufferings through which they must go in order to get there. Those are part of his gracious plan for us. These dear crosses that come into our life that he's selected so that we would be tried and strengthened through them. These are not like, like you've got these two powers, right? You've got the devil and his power and God and his power, and they're just continually fighting it out as if, well, sometimes the devil does stuff and God doesn't like it. But he can't do anything about it, as if that's the case. No. Know that if these troubles come upon us, this is part of his design too. He's got this. That's again, this note of comfort through this. So the people that are facing these things, who are being threatened to go into captivity, if anyone is taken captive, to captivity he goes. If he must be slain, he must be slain. This is part of the plan. The last line, here is a call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. Here you have a case of translators trying to help you out, but in Greek there's no word for here is a call for, or what does the NIV have there? Someone have that?
This calls for the patient endurance.
Okay, this calls for. What the Greek just says is, this is the endurance and faith of the saints. It doesn't. What it sounds like when you say this calls for, or this is a call for, it's like it's a call for you to do something, for you to endure. And all it says is this is the endurance and the faith of the saints. So you see how the translation is just trying to help you out, trying to say like, this is what it's getting at. But maybe that's a little bit more than was in the words itself. I hesitate to say this. So like in my Bible, when I studied that, in pencil, I crossed off the word call for just because I know that that's not in Greek. That's an indicator to me that that's not actually in there. When I say I'm cautious about that, I would be cautious about telling you to cross something out in your Bible. We don't want to do that. We're not Thomas Jefferson. We don't do a scrapbook Bible. You've heard that. You're aware of that. He took just cut out the parts that he thought were appropriate, and then he pasted them into his own book. Good statesman, not so good theologian. But another way to mark those things, if you ever find things like that or you hear them, if you aren't conversant in Greek and see that, you wouldn't know it. But another thing that I just would sometimes do instead of crossing out, would just put it in parentheses as an indicator, again, to me, that that's actually not in the text, but it's meant to try to help us understand it, but it might not always be useful in helping us. A different way of approaching a translation like the New King James, what that translation does is every time that they insert a word that's not actually in the Greek, but they do it just so that you can, because you can't, it's hard to make sense of it otherwise, they put those in italics in the translation. That can be sometimes helpful. In this case, they don't put that in there because they didn't insert any words in that translation. I think the New King James just says, this is the endurance and faith of the saints. It's a little bit more close to the Greek. All right? But so the point here is, this is not necessarily a call to action on your part. It's a description of what the saints have to endure. Okay? And you could draw that from that out. It does call on us to do that. It's just not in the text. This is what the saints have to endure. And this is faith in the midst of all of this. You've got this beast. So again, we've said, who is this beast? It seems to be, based on the beginning of the chapter, we looked back at Daniel and we said this is civil government. When it talked about this beast that has like a leopard, a bear, a lion, that picture language comes from Daniel. And Daniel is explained as the civil authority, these kings, right? So civil government, but it's in the sense that it's attacking Christ's church. I think we can look and say sometimes civil government does that. We can look throughout history. So you wouldn't necessarily be looking at any particular government, because we can look throughout history and say, this is what governments do. They don't always do this and not in the same way. And sometimes it's worse, and sometimes it's better. And I think that's what's reflected when it talks about this beast having a mortal wound that's healed, which is interesting because a mortal wound usually is a wound that kills you, right? But he's mortally wounded, but that wound has healed up. So it's something you'd think would kill it, but it doesn't die. It's got these scars. And we said maybe that's talking about the conversion of Constantine, and the government for a while kind of becomes officially Christian. You might look at it in grand scheme of history and you see sometimes there's periods of relief. But that wound heals, and the beast doesn't die, and the attacks continue. Let's keep going. The second beast now. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. You see that? It's going to keep on referring back to that first beast, and this is one of those references when he says the beast whose mortal wound was healed. And these 2 beasts are kind of inseparable. Remember, the first beast is teaching people to worship the dragon, which we said is the devil. Now, the second beast, it exercises the authority of the first beast. So the first beast has this authority to ruin things, and the second beast has authority they're connected in some way. But this one is different in that it had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It looks lamb-like and talks dragonish. So the lamb, and we've seen the lamb in Revelation, and that's portraying Christ. And usually if you'd say something looks like a lamb, that's, if March goes in like a lamb or out like a lamb and out like a lion, right? The lamb is the tender, is the good one, right? That's the way this beast looks. Looks good. Might even say it looks like Jesus. But speaks like a dragon. And we said that we've already seen chapter before, the dragon is the devil, that ancient serpent called the devil. What does that help us with in trying to figure out what it's talking about? Some force that's connected to the first beast, but looks good, and yet has devilish speech. Most scholars, Reformation scholars, Lutheran scholars especially, have seen kind of something like this. Well, certainly in their day, in the Reformation age, they look at the papacy and see that it looks very nice. It looks like godly work. In fact, the idea of the papacy being the vicar of Christ, the spokesman of Jesus on earth, speaks like the lamb, or it looks like the lamb, to look like the lamb, but speaks like the dragon. And the Lutherans pointed to doctrine, teaching of the church that condemned the gospel. That says, if anyone teaches that salvation is by grace through faith alone, let him be eternally condemned. That's the proclamation of the Council of Trent. To condemn the very heart of the gospel. But it wouldn't be exclusive. And then there's other verses, especially the 1 Thessalonians, that talk about the man of lawlessness and the Antichrist, and says that this teaching that comes from this is opposed to the gospel. I don't think we would want to limit that, though, and say that's the only thing that this is talking about. But I think the lamb look suggests that this is something in the church. Something in the church that ties in with the authority of the dragon and uses the authority of the dragon, not the dragon, but of the first beast of the government to do its dirty work. And we've seen that in history too. A lot of the persecutions have come with the sometimes directed from the state, but sometimes it's just using the power of the state, the sword of the state, in order to do its dirty work. But we keep on reading to find out more. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. That came up, I think, before with the first beast, and how a lot of the persecutions in the early church, they dealt with having to worship the image of the beast. In the persecutions of Rome, like part of that was the emperor worship, and they'd have like an image of the emperor, and you have to give incense to the emperor. You have to do that. The miracles, perhaps, being able to do signs. I think Lutherans had seen the propensity within the Roman Church to rely on, well, if someone did signs, then you kind of had to listen to them, these supposed miracles that may or who knows. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. See, now when it keeps on talking about the beast, and it's not always clear, is it talking about the second beast, or is it the first beast? They kind of get mixed up. It seems like they keeps on going back to the first beast. Like the second beast is getting people still to worship the first beast. It seems that way. It also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. Now, people have made hay out of this verse. And trying to identify what is this mark, and a few years ago now? I don't know. Or is it, it's still a thing. They're talking about it's this microchipping, or people are even talking about this is the vaccine. Something that is inserted into your body in order to let you know that you need proof of this in order to be able to do commerce and exchange, or even be let in. No, this is not. It's not the same thing. But it was just in the news just this week, I think. Was it? Someone. It's Riley Gaines, the swimmer, has married someone from, I don't remember where he's from, and he can't get his green card because of not being. I think it's the vaccine, but. That's just what made me think of it, but of the government forbidding really interaction. It does have this commercial aspect. I know it got brought up when there had that, the trucker thing up in Canada, and how the government then was freezing bank accounts of some people based on their behavior, without going through the criminal system where you charge someone with a crime. You just, if they misbehave, and I don't know all the details, but just you observe a large entity with the power to keep people from buying and selling because they don't fall in line with something. And so you can just imagine these things. I don't know that we can look at this text and say, that's what it's referring to. It's referring to the government of Canada doing this or that or something. but you can see the potential for an anti-Christian movement entity with great power to get people in line, unless you have the mark. And the mark, just like the mark, the seal that's on God's people, this seems like a sort of a similar mark. They want the mark of the beast, the mark that shows that you get in line with, adhere to this. I think just in the same way that we wouldn't we're not going to say this is what this is, and we put it in this square box, and I don't know that we can look at this. Again, we're not reading the book of Revelation with the newspaper by the side to try to decode it, right? But you can look at the world we live in and say, yeah, I think I recognize this kind of behavior. I don't think it's out of line to suggest that we could have a government that wants to undermine the Christian faith. And we're not talking about everyone in the government, every agent of the government. There's a lot of agents of the government, including, I function as an agent of the government when I do a wedding, because I sign a marriage license. And there's any number of agencies or things that we're all involved in this in some way. I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I pulled it up this morning, and we've talked about it. Just as an example, an aspect of government that I think that probably that touches every one of us. I would say. I think that's safe to say, even if you're not directly, actively involved, and that's the education system. And that is an education system. Even our private schools are touched by them, because many, at least I think in Minnesota, I don't know if all the schools, I don't know in our area schools if all of the teachers are licensed, but if they're licensed by the state. And the standards of effective practice, I just printed this off this morning. It's not as long and detailed as I thought it was. It's pretty straight. It's pretty, but I think you'd be shocked in how, and not all of this is it's not like anti-Christian on its surface. It's not like you teachers will undermine students' Christian faith. And much of it is basically, it's the stuff you've heard about: cultural Marxism, diversity, equity, inclusion. What else is it? Critical race theory. It's not just in one spot. There is a specific standard called racial consciousness and reflection, but all the way through, it is piece by piece. Every single, learning environments. This is what it says this is the standard for teachers creating a learning environment for the students. The teacher fosters an environment that ensures student identities such as race, ethnicity, national origin, language, sex and gender identity, sexual orientation, physical development, emotional ability, socioeconomic class, religious beliefs are historically and socially contextualized, affirmed, and incorporated into a learning environment where students are empowered to learn and contribute as their whole selves. And now, understand that you will have plenty of agents of the government who are going to say, this is nuts, and I'm not doing it. And they're trying to maintain their conscience and maintain actual teaching. There's very little in here about actual instruction. But it's now, and this, from what I understand, this is an administrative. This isn't codified into law. As far as I know, this was not legislated. It's administered by whatever, appointed boards and whoever, I don't know. But you have the state saying to everyone who doesn't, whoever is licensed as a teacher in Minnesota should be doing this. Now, again, like we're going to have people that are going to push back in various ways, hopefully. But there, or even if that's, I think those are the like standards for new teachers, getting a new license. A teacher who it takes has to do, in order to maintain a license, has to have continuing ed credits. One of the required ones for all the licenses is one in cultural competency training. And granted, this is not just in the state. This is anyone who works in a corporate environment has to do this too. And you have to receive this training. It's indoctrination. Now, granted, you'd have Christians who have to take this and they're like, I just got to sit through this, otherwise I lose my job. And I don't buy any of it. But this is the educators have to take the training that shows evidence of self-reflection and discussion of the following topics in a way that deepens teachers' understandings of their own frames of reference, potential bias in these frames, and the impact of bias on expectations for and relationships with students, families, and school communities. And these are the topics: racial, cultural, and socioeconomic groups, American Indian and Alaskan Native students, religion, systemic racism, gender identity, including transgender students, sexual orientation, language diversity, and individuals with disabilities, and mental health concerns. So there's definitely an attempt, in order that you do it to the teachers, so that so I said, we've got good people in those positions that are saying phooey, but for I don't know what percentage of that there is. How many of them are taking it, and it's doing what they tended. I fear for those who start by saying this is phooey, but they have to sit through and listen to it. The point is eventually to break them down. Dan, did you
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons that I'm retiring is because of the DEI stuff that we have to do with social work. And I've kind of started to make people know what my opinions on that. So I'm trying not to get fired before I retire. I'm done with it. And I'm letting people know, this is wrong.
And I think that's happening a lot, where especially if someone has the option, or they just can't anymore. But you kind of wonder, so they're like with this second beast, and it's hard to know. The second beast is how connected is this to the first? Is this another agency? This is kind of what I fear. If you've got this other agency, the second beast, that is kind of looks like a lamb, could that be like nonprofits, like churches, in order to maintain their tax exempt status? Or in order to kind of stay on the right side of the beast, of the other beast, this beast now has to play along. That could include Lutheran schools. That they don't want to lose the grant money. They don't want to lose their funding, some funding from the state. And so then they say, they try to, and it's a big issue that we have to wrestle with as a church body. We license teachers to be licensed under these, and so far the response has been, well, the board knows what we teach, and they still want us to do it, and they're not going to stop us from licensing them. I don't know. I don't know if that's sufficient or not. I'm not sure. What the answer is, how do we handle these? I don't know. I think the first thing is we want to recognize it. Recognizing what's going on. I think that may be part of what we are going to hear in the sermon today. Jesus is going to say to us, wake up. And one of those things is wake up to realize what's happening. Wake up to recognize the danger to your faith and the faith of your children. Yeah, maybe that's, maybe leave it, we can go on from the, I don't know what the mark is. I don't know that it is any more than what is the mark on the believers, the seal. We often connect that to baptism. That's not a physical mark either. And we do mark a child on the forehead, but that's just with the finger. So I don't know that I'd expect that this mark of the beast is some kind of tattoo or microchip or something like that. I don't know. To me, I'd avoid anyone sticking anything in me that doesn't belong there. But kind of a related thing. Have you heard of like the social credit system, like in China? And if you read about it or you try to look it up, you'll have all kinds of articles and agencies saying, no, it's not really that bad. It's it's not a China statewide system, and everyone doesn't have a specific score. The idea is though that the government does there may not be a universal standard across the whole nation thing. There have been pilot things where they have actually done that. You get a score. Everyone, in a locality, you get a score, and they want to promote certain kind of behavior. The government does, and so if you do certain things, like I can't remember, if you take certain trainings, you could get a higher score. If you write blog posts criticizing the government, then you get negative scores, and they can do these things if you just based on what you do, and that score then is tied in with like a credit score. We will have that, and even there though we've got that in the United States, but that's not necessarily a government thing. Everyone's got a score, a FICO score that may or may not be helpful to you if you're And people live by these things, and they want a higher score. And even if it's not a government-wide thing, there is the attempt by the state to promote certain behaviors. Would be things like, we've heard this, we hear it around it, like things like maybe getting up to date on your vaccinations. That would be a positive thing. Writing something critical of the government. Spreading misinformation that might get labeled that, right? Something that you're trying to let people know about, and you say, or like what you're saying, you're talking to people, and someone finds out about that, you get knocked for that, right? and that could be tied in with then, just like I said, an actual credit score for borrowing and stuff like that. You'd be dinged for that financially. And so that does make you, when you read about the ability they can't buy or sell unless you have the mark, unless you do the things, you can see things like this, can't we? And I think that we wouldn't want to jump and say, this is new and this is finally the fulfillment of this. This has probably always been there in different ways. When reading Becker's commentary, he's already talking about stuff like that in China. Or he talks about communist countries that they want they're open about it, wanting to subvert the faith. And he talks this is early 80s, and he's writing about the schools. And there it's mainly talking about evolution being taught in the public schools, or things that are assumed in the things that in the early 80s.
Actually, you could say the mark really also can be defined. It's just your use of social media because you'll be betrayal.
Yeah.
So, you listen to Canada and how they're likely going to pass something that says you can have premeditated hate speech that you can go to jail for. But it's somebody that has some ideology and, if it's kind of off on something that you were just using it, whether knowingly or not.
Yeah, they could probably track. So for sure, if you're on social media and you see something and you click like, all of that stuff that's how the system works. It's an algorithm based on interaction with the thing. And so if you click certain things, then you're going to be fed certain things. You've noticed that, right? You were shopping on another website, and then you pull up some other thing, and there's an ad for that thing, right? Because all of those things are, as much as the companies can, and they're doing it for commercial, mainly companies, but then for that to be used I mean, like, it makes me nervous that the insurance company wants a tracker in my vehicle. And they can say, we only use that for, determining risk, and maybe that's true right now. But all it would take is for some reason for them to say, when I don't know, the government. And we're not being like conspiracy theorists on this. This is
But
the way these things
it's a
work.
market you can't erase. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there somewhere in some database.
It's there. Yep. It's data, and that's the way that. A lot of the language comes about the social credit. It's a data collection system that allows, whether it's companies or governments or school systems, to determine whatever they want to determine. They have the metrics for that. To determine whether someone meets like educational standards by how the graduates function with social media at some point, like to see if they're following what we taught them to do or something. I don't want to get too, but all right. But we want to see what happened, what goes on with this beast. What do we pay attention to? Now we have another verse in verse 18 that also says this calls for wisdom. Again, in Greek, it's just this is wisdom. That's all it says. And the calls for is an explanation insertion. This is wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And again, this is one that hay has been made of. What is this? What is the number of the beast? I couldn't resist. Like, we got these fancy things that I can never really use, but they're what is this? Now, we wouldn't ordinarily, we haven't done this with the numbers in Revelation. We've seen their significance based on usage and how they're used. We don't have any other use, particularly of this number. So how do we go about figuring this out? There have been, and is that even, should we do something that adds up to this number? There's that name Becker had in his commentary, and I didn't write it down, I can't remember what it is, for this kind of thing, where you add up numbers based on letters to try to come up, calculate. Except that this verse does say, let him calculate, to add up the numbers. It's not a common word in the Bible. That's the same word when Jesus talks about let the man count the cost when he's making plans for the harvest and so on, or to build. He's going to calculate it. To add it up, what could we say? There have been some, maybe you've seen some of these. This first one it first shows up in the 1600s by some Protestant. I don't remember the name, I didn't write it down, but then it's really pushed by a Seventh-day Adventist, I think in the 1800s, where you take this what it says as a title, claimed as a title for the Pope. The title is, but the official title for the Pope is the Vicar of Christ, Vicaria Christi. There's debate about whether this Vicarius, so the Vicarius Filii Dei means the Vicar of the Son of God. And the claim was that this is even on one of the tiaras that the Pope has, but that's actually never been found. There is, that I know of, not an actual record and a tiara by the Pope that has this title. That this title is not, it may have been used occasionally, but the vicar of, when they use vicar, the vicar means in the place of, someone who is in the place of. So the Vicar of Christ, he's a representative of Christ. It's confusing for us because we use that term for student pastors, vicars, but it means someone who's operating in the stead of someone. And normally the Pope, an official title of the Pope is the Vicar of Christ on earth. Problematic, but that's a different conversation. But if you did take this as the title for the Pope, and you used Roman numerals and not all the letters in the Latin alphabet make numbers, but some of them do. And if you add up the ones that do in Vicarius Filii, day, then you do get 666. This probably isn't, I wouldn't, one, because this is not actually an official title of the Pope of Christ, and you can, the Roman Catholic response to this gave some other name, and I didn't even click on the link to find out who this person is, because it's probably some famous person, and it adds up to her name too, or something like this other person's name. You can do that with. I wouldn't put that much stock in it. And Becker, in his lectures, mentions this too. He goes, that's not really fair. But there is an much older one. And this one's this is in the, I don't know, relatively recently that someone, they came up and figured this one out. Irenaeus, we talked about that when we were going through the church history class. So he is, see his dates, they're approximate dates, 130 to 202. That's within a couple hundred years of Jesus. In fact, Irenaeus was a disciple of a man named Polycarp. And remember that name? He was a martyr. And Polycarp was a disciple of St. John, the author of Revelation. So you're 2 generations away from the writing of this. And Irenaeus, he talks, and although he's not actually saying that he believed this, there were people who said that when the Antichrist comes, he will be a Latin man. A Latin man. And he says, I'm hearing this. And then he says, and the people who are in charge, who are governing currently, are the Latins, the Romans. And when you take in Greek, and he's writing in Greek, and you take this word that he uses, that the Antichrist is to be a Latin man. The Greek language does use numbers for all of its letters. And so if you take the numbers of Latinus and the numbers that are associated with those, 1-300, you can add up those quickly enough, maybe. That comes out to 666 as well. Again, I don't know how much to make of that. But the one thing that has going for it is that it's very old, and that it's by someone so close to when John is writing. That's all. I think maybe a more solid approach would be to deal with the numbers like we deal with the other numbers in Revelation. So we've dealt with the number 12 being, well, let's review that. What was the number 12 usually referring to? We had the tribes of the Israelites and the apostles, and that was the kind of the church. The church in its fullness. 4 is typically the number of the. You had it in 4s, people, language, tribe, and nation, or the 4 corners of the earth. Tends to be stuff about the earth and the world. 10 is a number of its completeness, its fullness. And then 7, which is probably the most common number that we have, is this number that deals with, and we might have added 3 in here too, right? The number of the Trinity. You have the Trinity dealing with the world as the number of the covenant, the number of God's promises of the gospel, generally, right? And those are kind of general observations. We're not saying this is God doesn't give us a code book and say this means this. It's just we're observing from how they're used, right? Okay. So what would 6 be? How would it relate to any of these? You do see that the most common explanation is that it's almost 7. It's just not quite. It's just never quite satisfying. Never quite the level, it's the devil trying to be like God, but he just can't do it. Another way of looking at it is that the number 7, so you got the 7 period, but then you have this 3.5. Times and half a time, the 42 months. That half is usually a number that's associated with evil. So it's kind of the opposite of the covenant is this. So, the 3.5 years, that's the time when false doctrine is mixed in with true doctrine. but the true teaching comes the whole time. So maybe what if we had half of the church? We'd have 6. So, is that the opposite? So you got the number of the beast being the opposite, like 3.5 is. I don't know, but we're just kind of left with a kind of a sense of what maybe this is, and then why do you have 6, 6, 6? Well, if you want to do it, you've got the 6, but then it's 10, multiplied times 10, that completeness, and then it's by 10 times 10 times 6, and then you come up with the 66. I don't know. It's interesting, what do you know about like this number? Like I don't know, you see it in like Satan worship kind of, it'll as the number of the beast being the devil's number. An interesting thing is in its use in hymnals. So when you have a hymnal like ours doesn't have 600 that many hymns in it, but the new blue one does. Some hymnals do because they start their numbering differently. They number the early pages. So what do you do when you get to that? So here's a paragraph from a review of the New Wells hymnal, which does have that issue in it. He's talking about this hymnal. And he says, it's hard to number the how many hymns there are because they need to deal with that beastly number, 666, from this verse. ELW, that's Evangelical Lutheran Worship, a previous hymnal, ignored the issue, just used it for a hymn. LSB, that's Lutheran Service Book, that's the Missouri Synod's hymnal. They editorialized by putting, "O little flock, fear not the foe," as that hymn for 666. Take it, But then this is interesting. The good folks in the Wisconsin Synod are evidently the most superstitious of the lot because CW21 skips the number altogether, with the hymn 665 followed directly by 667. They did enough of a. For some reason, not wanting to associate a hymn with hymn 666, they just didn't put the hymn in there. And he says, "Kind of superstitious, aren't you?" like, would that be a problem if we did? I don't know. It's maybe well meant. But any questions on the number of the beast, 666? All right, let's. We can look in 14 a little bit. Then I looked, so there's another observation. Then I looked, then I saw. And behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and the sound of loud thunder. It's like everything that we're seeing now we've seen before. Yeah? Mount Zion is the holy hill. That's the hill that the temple is built on in Jerusalem. And sometimes Jerusalem is used this way. It's describing the church. Stood the Lamb. And with him, and we had that, the Lamb standing on the throne. So this is describing the church, but the church not as she is on earth, but this church in heaven. Now, so the same number, 144,000 that we had seen, these are the numbers that were sealed before the destruction could come upon the earth. They're going to mark, all of them are going to be brought in. They're going to come to faith before the destruction comes. They're going to be taken care of. And now he sees them safe on Mount Zion with the Lamb, right, on the throne. And these are the ones that had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And that's just like the seal, right? And a lot of times seals had the person's name imprinted in it. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters. Jesus' voice in the chapter 1, it is describing the one who spoke like the rush of rushing water. And the sound of loud thunder, we've seen that before too. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. We've seen the harps before too, of those standing around the throne. And they were singing a new song, and we've heard that before. They were singing a new song. This gives us a little bit more information about it. Before the throne and before the new living creatures, because we had looked at all the Old Testament passages that talk about singing the new song. The new song always seems to be the song of salvation, the song of the gospel, right? He says here, no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. No one, the only believers know this song because they're the ones who believe it. who know the God, who believe the gospel, and to learn that song is this act of faith. That the unbelievers, they hear it like Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia when he's creating the world, and the lion sings the world into creation, and everyone who doesn't believe him, they cover their ears and they go, "Oh, that's a horrible sound." Of the sound of God to the unbelievers is like nails on a chalkboard. But to the believers, it is the sweetest thing. See, only the believers can really know that song. Who have been redeemed to be redeemed from the earth. They've been brought out. They've been bought with a price. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb who goes... there's other verses in the New Testament. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians talks about the life of the Christian as those who have been undefiled, those who are pure. They're not pure on by their own behavior, but by the virtue of the merit of Christ given to them. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. So normally first fruits would be like the part that you bring in first. A lot of times when that's talking about first fruits, it's talking about like the first fruits from the dead, that there's some that are going to come and then the rest is going to come later. Like the first fruits of the crop, you've got the first fruits of the crop and then the rest of the crop comes in. But here, it seems to be when he calls them the first fruits for God and the Lamb, these are the first fruits that are brought as the offering. So it's not saying these are the first fruits and then more people are going to be coming. They're the whole thing. But these are the ones that are brought into the temple. God's believers are his first fruits. Not meaning that there's going to be more to come, but that these are the ones that have been brought in the harvest. They get brought in first. And they're it. That's the first fruits. That was the part that went to the temple, to the for the offering, right? That's what his church is. And the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. And again, not blameless by their own merit, but blameless through they've been washed in the blood of the Lamb, right? That's all we can do today. Let's close with God's word is our great heritage.